Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust, Alex Holt here with you today. Alex, tell us what this podcast is all about.
Yeah, this podcast is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today we have Dave Choutka with us. Dave is the executive director of Lead 222. He's also the author of Walking Through the Valleys. Dave is passionate about helping others in life's valleys, especially youth pastors, which led him to write Walking Through the Valleys, which focuses on his story of navigating through 8 years of difficulty of valleys in life and ministry. Sharing his experiences and lessons learned through that 8-year valley, Dave's honest and hope-filled words are a flashlight of encouragement to those who are navigating their own journey. Dave is married and he's got 3 kids.
Dave, welcome, man.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thanks for making the trek all the way. I think we are at some of the furthest points away from each other in Indianapolis.
I think so.
So I appreciate you making the trek. And we met like over 6 years ago now, which is crazy.
It is
to think about. And neither of us were doing what we're doing now.
No.
And so it's been cool because we had a reconnect. I think in 2019 we bumped into each other, and both of us were kind of started in our new works and all that stuff. So it's just great to reconnect, and I'm excited for people to hear your story. I'm excited to hear parts of your story that I've not heard. Mm-hmm. And I think too, just with the book that you've written in the last year, what's amazing about that is like we were talking about before the episode is just, you just never know the ripple effects of how that's going to serve somebody. And it's served more people, that your story has served more people than you thought it would. Mm-hmm. And I'm hopeful it'll be an encouragement to myself and to Alex, but also to our listeners. And so just thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So kind of get us started. We always like to start kind of at the beginning. You know, tell us a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up, and then that thread that led you towards whatever you moved towards in kind of those young adult college age years, if you will.
Well, grew up in Nebraska my first 10 years. And so my dad was born and raised there. Huge Nebraska Cornhusker
I was just going to ask. Cornhusker fans.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
Adopted into the Big Ten. I'm a Michigan guy, you know.
It was great growing up.
Oh, yeah.
Tough last 20 years.
Yeah, great. Yeah. When you were a kid. Great.
Absolutely. 3 championships. Now it's tough going. But, hey, still rooting for him. So grew up in Nebraska. My dad grew up Catholic. My mom didn't have any faith aspect, and so they got married. And my dad was a salesman. He traveled a lot, so he was gone a lot of my first 10 years of our life. And my mom would kind of share. You know, she was going through just the difficulty. I was, probably 2-3 years old. Dad was gone a lot, and 2 people showed up at the door, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mom, kind of received that and became a Jehovah's Witness. Wow. And so, when I was little, she'd be taking me to the temple and different things. But my aunt and uncle were believers and really praying for my mom and dad. And my mom ended up coming to Christ. And so when I was about 6, 7, I saw my mom just really passionate about God's word and really learning what it means to be a follower of Christ. And so I was like, I want that. And so I, received Christ into my life, and my dad did a couple years later. Wow. And we moved to Illinois, got a part of a great church out there. And, but as I went into my teen years, sports really became my identity, played different sports but I had a new youth pastor that came in my junior year. And even though I didn't attend, youth group and different things very often, he really just, reached out to me and cared for me and never guilted me. Mm-hmm. And growing up, I always wanted to be a meteorologist.
I love that. I'm all about that.
So I realized this was a God thing because, there's a lot of math in meteorology, and I'm terrible at math. So God knew what he was doing, but I wanted to be a meteorologist. I had already, was at a college enrolled, so I graduated high school, and my youth pastor was like, hey, come to a Christ in Youth conference. I had never been on a camp, a retreat, a conference, and so I went. And you guys, I mean, God was just doing some amazing things. I remember just a lot of conversations, and I remember the last night being in the balcony. It was at Milligan University, and the pastor was just giving a great message and invited people to come to receive Jesus. And I just remember I'm leaning on that balcony, and I'm seeing hundreds of students go forward to receive Christ. And I just felt like the Holy Spirit just, whisper into my life, into this is what I want you to be about. And so I talked to my youth pastor after that, and I said, I want to dedicate my life to go into ministry. And so we talked and prayed, and I didn't tell my parents. And so I got home, and my bedroom was in the basement. I walked down to my room, and there was a Bible, a brand new Bible on my bed that my mom had bought for me while I was gone. And it was just like confirmation from God. Like,
that's cool.
Here's your manual. Like, here, I'm setting you up. You're getting ready to go and do what I've called you to do. And I had no idea what to do next. I was already enrolled. So I talked to the pastors at my church, and they had all gone to Ozark Christian College. I'm like, where's that? They said,
it's a valid question.
It's a valid question. They said, Joplin, Missouri. I said, okay. So I applied in June, was accepted in July, was there in August.
Wow.
And started, that journey of going to Bible college and going into ministry.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's what I love is, and it doesn't always have to be the person who's on staff, but like my youth pastor was that person, not only, to a larger group of people and set that example, but like how he individually poured into my life,
Yep.
And what's so great about those kind of environments for young people, and I would say adults too, is what you had talked about, the conversations that happen after.
Yes.
That's right.
Those like moments with that kind of the table is set. There's something we're all thinking about or have experienced together, and now having trusted people to lean into and talk with, and those kind of I see in you conversations like, hey man, I affirm that, I see that in you. And then you're like, okay, that gets you excited and like make a commitment. And then the next thing you know, you come home and there's a Bible on your bed, and that's never happened before, right? And it's like brand new, and you're like, wait, the timing of all this, okay. It's just growing this conviction. And that's awesome, man. I love that. I love that part of your story.
Yeah. So take us through then that college journey. You go to Bible college. Where do you go from there? What happens next?
Yeah, so met my wife at college. We were friends for a couple years, and I remember my junior year, a friend, I always liked her, a friend asked her out. I was like, oh man, I can't let this go on any longer. So asked her out. Luckily, she said yes to me, and so we got married, and she had one more year. So I was working at Ramada Inn, part-time youth pastor, making $350 bucks a week, I think. And then the first ministry was in New Philadelphia, Ohio. And 2-year-old church, was the first youth pastor, started with 5 kids. And we were there 5 years.
Wow. And
then God led us back here to Carmel and to Northview Church, and was on staff there for 11 years. And then God led us out to Colorado. And then in Colorado, experienced an unhealthy church and resigned. And so started a very difficult season in our life.
In that season, that around that time is when you and I met, and had some conversations and things like that. And, what were some of those things that started to culminate? Because I know that has a trajectory line into the reason why you wrote this book.
Yeah.
But talk to us a little bit about some of the journey, and then some of those like principles you carried out of that. And I know a lot of that gets expressed in the book, it's a very personal journey for you. But as you feel comfortable in sharing with us, like kind of what were some of those principles along the journey and the storylines of the valleys that you were experiencing, and to encourage us with?
Yeah. I remember it was probably in October. I ended up resigning in February, but this was in October, and I woke up at 5 a.m. and I felt like the Lord was just kind of speaking to me to get up and have something to say to you. And so I woke up, got my coffee, that's important at 5 a.m.
If I'm going to hear you, Lord,
right, I gotta be.
I do need to be awake a little bit.
I want to be ready for this.
That's right.
That's good.
And so went to my, chair where I have my, quiet time, my devotions with the Lord. And I just said, I'm here, I want to hear from you. And over some time, I felt the Lord just say, your significance is not in what you do. And he repeated that of just whispering that to me, your significance is not in what you do. And I went and got my journal, and I'm writing this down, and it was really amazing, just kind of God speaking to me in that way. And you guys, I never really knew how that was going to play out. But after I resigned, and it was my first Sunday after I resigned, first time of 20 years, I'm not employed. I'm not at a church. I'm not the pastor. And I remember it was my son's birthday, and so got up, made breakfast for everybody. And, we decided we're still going to go to church. And so we found a church that we were going to go to and went into service. And it was like really powerful. It was like the first time, just worshiping without, the hurt and the anger and some bitterness, that was just kind of coming out. And the whole message that Sunday was about, like, your significance is not in what you do.
Yeah.
My first Sunday, I'm not, at a church, I'm not employed. And what God spoke to me months earlier was coming to fruition of, like, he's reminding me, like, what my true identity is in. It's in him and not in what I do. And that was just really powerful for me. And I just remember just in tears, and my daughter was like, Dad, are you okay? And I'm like, I am. I am, because God sees me. Yes. Like, he sees me right now in this moment. When it just feels like everything has, come crashing down, and it's like the fear of the unknown. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to provide? Like, how's my family? Are we going to have to move again? And just navigating, where your world all of a sudden, gets rocked and shattered. And it's like, what are you going to do? And I, at that time, I didn't want to go back into ministry. Just being so hurt and struggling with that. And my wife was like, well, why don't you take a sabbatical? And that was just such wisdom. And so being in Colorado, with the mountains, it was, such a blessing to be able to just go up Rocky Mountain National Park and go up into the mountains and just seek the Lord of, like, God, who am I? Like, what do you want me to do? And so I got to the end of the sabbatical, and I realized, my heart is ministry, in some capacity. I don't know what that's going to look like. And then I went through the process of figuring out what's next, and, here I am. Then that was February, I resigned, and, it's not an easy process to figure out, like, what is next after dealing with, some difficult valleys in that.
I think in that, I want to jump in here, is in that thought, there's so much to, like, good to unpack, and just nuggets you just dropped freely for all of us to grab. But it was like, like free nuggets. Like, if you had a coupon for free chicken nuggets,
free
like,
nuggies,
you gotta redeem that stuff, and that Chick-fil-A app, when it's like, hey, you got this reward, it's I'm going to Chick-fil-A. I'm not even hungry, and I'm going. But Dave, what you just shared is a storyline that I have seen. First and foremost, I saw it with pastors, because a lot of our work started with helping pastors in vocational transition to kind of reset in our life mapping process, think through, hey, am I ready to get back into full-time ministry? Do I need to think about my skills and where they could apply differently in different settings? But it's also what I found in the journey of the last 5 years for people working just kind of everyday jobs in the marketplace. It's similar, especially in the wakes of economies that change and all this stuff, and a side hustle becomes the full thing, and then there's a year that doesn't go as well, and it's like, do I have to give this up? Do I keep doing this? What do I do? And then they pour out their soul into this work. And even with like a healthy relationship often to the work, and then they're like, that thing's gone. I'm no longer X person. I'm no longer this business owner, or I'm no longer holding this position. Or I've experienced this with like, high school basketball coaches as well in sport. Like, I'm no longer someone's coach. You wake up one day, you're no longer someone's pastor, coach, this, that. And then the trail of identity and the detanglement that needs to start happening over time can be really complex. And when there's wounding or trauma or things associated with that and hurt as well, it's even more complex to work through. And so I think it's such a good word to separate, significance, role, identity. My purpose is greater than any position I'll ever hold, or title. Those kinds of things are really meaningful that you drop there.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, I think I'm sitting here partially speechless because I'm sitting in that right now. I recently left my role in ministry and wasn't expecting it, wasn't planning on it, and I'm in that, like, what's next? I'm getting ready to get on a plane and go to Colorado to go to the mountains to figure out what is next.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I just I resonate with so much of that. And I think the Lord has been very kind to my wife and I in that reminder of helping us to separate like our identity from the work that we've done the last 5.5 years. Yeah. And so I think that's just such an important reminder for people that like you are not your work, that you are a child of God. Right. And the Lord has so much more for you in that. And so I just resonate with all of that.
I mean, and I've literally in the last 5 days had 3 conversations with pastors who've recently had like a transition, some healthier than others, some more smooth than others, if you will, some with less trauma than others. And it's a similar thing, but I think it's also a similar thing as I watch people retire who were a doctor, as people who practice law, as people who were school teachers, or they had been in this key volunteer role somewhere and now that season shifted, right? So I think there's so much good in that, and I just wanted to say thanks for your vulnerability and sharing that as well as part of your journey. But keep going on this journey of kind of those principles you were experiencing and gaining during a time where you're experiencing a lot of valleys.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, I had it so set in my mind, that I was going to be back in the church because that's all I've ever known. Yeah. And I think, part of that too, a big learning for me is I had to really seek the Lord in this as far as like, I can't get ahead of him because when we get in the valleys and things get really uncomfortable, right? I have no paycheck. You're feeling the crunch of like, man, I got to figure this out. And what I really learned though, is that I can't get ahead of God, and I think a lot of times when we get in the valley or we're in a tough situation and there's some difficult life circumstances, we want out of it as fast as possible. Yep. And unfortunately there are no fast passes, and some of God's greatest work and maybe his greatest work is when we are in the valley and we're going through it. And for me, what was so powerful is that time led to me truly surrendering. That's when I was like, God, I can't figure this out. Like I don't know exactly how I'm going to do this. Yeah. And all I know is like how I'm doing this in my own power. I'm getting dead ends and it's not working. And so it got me to a place of total surrender. Yeah. And when I got to a place of total surrender, I stopped, that kind of pursuit of like just getting out of the valley. And I started to move to asking God, what are you teaching me? Yeah. Like, what do I need to start learning in this season and in this valley? Because actually, if I started to surrender and I opened up to God teaching me, then that's when doors started to open and he began to teach me things that are going to prepare me for what's ahead. And so it was October. I had, resigned. I'm used to preaching and teaching, or, being creative in ministry world. And I never had any desire to write a book. I mean, honestly, it was never even in my mind. But God said, start writing. And so I got this outline of, walking through the valleys of take me from this valley, teach me in this valley, and transform me in this valley. So I started writing, and I thought, really, this is just going to be healing for me as I navigate these, difficult years of what it's been through car wrecks and transitions and, and church hurts and all that kind of stuff. And so I just started writing, and then I thought, man, okay, this has been really healing, and maybe this will be great for my kids. And then it really turned into, a process of like, I think this is going to bring hope and encouragement to others. But you guys, it was a 4-year journey of writing this because I had to transform. I had to walk through the valleys of not God not teaching me, then it was moving to real healing. Yeah. And the moments that I had to do the hard work of healing that brought transformation through the valley.
I think what I love too about your story is there's a lot of people who would just, and I'm not saying at times that this isn't like really justified by some people in the hurts and the pains and the traumas they've experienced, but for you then to have this redemptive thread to say, man, this is what I've gone through, and I know others in general are going through this, so I want to share this story. But then in your day-to-day work of how you're investing into pastors and youth pastors in particular on their journey, and to encourage them. And it's, I think, pastors and like CEOs, entrepreneurs, often it can the perception for them is that I'm alone in this, and I can't be real, which I think we got to work through that as a society and a culture, and the church needs to lead the way on that. Yes. Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you shouldn't have friends you can be real with and share your struggles and pains. But I think that's why it's so necessary, and to have the wisdom and the journey that you've been on of going from being at this large, very notariable like church, very influential church, to, hey, I'm going to go do this courageous thing in a different state, and it did not go how I wanted it to. Yep. And now I'm here, no job. What the heck? I've tried to do this thing the right way and give you my life and all these things. And so to now be able to walk alongside people in the day to day, like that's like a really beautiful redemptive thread of how God's worked in your life, man. It's really cool. Yeah.
Thank you. And so we ended up having to move. We had to sell our house. At that time, we thought, well, I didn't quite have something lined up when we made the decision to sell the house. So we listed the house, and then one of my mentors, Bo Shears, who's the president of Lead 222, youth ministry coaching and mentoring organization, and I had been a part of it in my youth ministry days for many years. Got coaching myself, was able to coach others. And, he said, listen, if you want to come on staff, we'd love to have you. You'll have to raise your own funds. And so we really prayed about that and felt like the Lord was saying, all right, pursue Lead. This was totally different than what I ever thought I would be doing. Yep. And so we sold the house. We moved back to Indiana, and we had to move into some friend's basement. And while I raised my funds, to be able to then start receiving a paycheck. And what we thought would be, a couple months at our friend's house, so it was Greg and Deb, and love you, Greg and Deb, and Deb's 95-year-old mom as well upstairs. And so a family of 5, 3 teenagers in the basement, and then COVID hit. And so what we thought would be a couple months turned into 6 months. But I raised my funds, we bought a house, and it's been an incredible journey the last 4 years of serving with Lead to pour into, these leaders. So LEAD is all about helping youth pastors, lead healthy lives, healthy families, and healthy ministries. And we really believe to reach this next generation, we need healthy youth pastors. We need healthy leaders that understand, a first priority is your relationship with God.
Yeah.
If you're married, it's your marriage.
Yeah.
And then, your ministry. And so grateful, that God has been able to, just redeem, all of that. And honestly, you guys, Lead 2 talks about win home field. And, that's been a priority too, for us navigating this. Like when you deal with church hurt and transitions and you have 3 kids and teenagers and you worry how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
And Don and I just said from the very beginning when I resigned, like, we're going to set the temperature and our kids are going to take this by how we respond and have open communication. And, cause I remember setting the girls down after I resigned. They were 9 and 11 at this time. And we were just talking and sharing and I said, girls, we love going out to eat, don't we? And they're like, yeah. And so we talked about our favorite restaurants. And I said, you know what? If we have a bad experience at a restaurant, it doesn't mean that we go back to that restaurant, but we're still going to go out to eat. Mm-hmm. And I said, we had a bad experience at this church, but we love the church and we're going to still serve the church and keep moving forward with that in mind. And so, we really just tried to help our kids, navigate this just as much as us. And, we had doubts, we had struggles. Don and I didn't get it right all the time, but I'm so grateful, that God has been in the midst of it.
Yeah. Dave, this conversation for me personally is just hitting very deep and very personally. So thank you for your vulnerability in sharing that. One of the things we love to ask all of our guests is, what is a book or podcast that has really been impacting you lately?
Yeah, I mean, actually for quite a few years, I mean, there's so many great, podcasts, but I've really enjoyed At the Table with Patrick Lencioni. That has been, really powerful. And in fact, in the book, I actually share an episode from that where we did an event to have closure from hurt that he shared about in a podcast on that. So that's been very meaningful to me, that podcast. And then I would say a book is Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Barton. It's been a powerful book and, really the idea to, solitude and, our time with the Lord, especially a little bit of what I talked about today of, man, God cares so much about our being with him. Yeah. And, obviously the doing is important and how we live out our faith in our life. But man, it's got to come from the overflow of our time and our relationship with Jesus. Yeah. And so that's been a great book for me to just continue to remind me and help me just continue to strengthen that as I lead leaders, as I lead youth pastors. I have to lead the way. Yeah. And so I have to be disciplined and to go after that in my own life.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love, even you talked about modeling that with your family, right? When you said we're going to set the temperature, my wife and I have been having those conversations. Yeah. Our kids are 7 and 5, so very different age and different conversation when we sat down and talked with them. But it was that same conversation that we had of like, we have to lead the way because we still believe that God wants to do incredible things through the local church. And we maybe didn't have the best experience when we exited where we were at. But we get to set the temperature for our home and how our kids are going to grow up in the church. So I love that seeing you model that from home to what you're doing now is just super incredible.
Well, and I think anybody who is in any sort of leadership position, and when we talk about everyday leadership, we're not just saying like title as CEO, executive director, XYZ. It's like as a coach, as a parent, as a volunteer, as a some sort of meaningful adult mentor to somebody, or even in your peers in the workplace. Yeah. But like taking those principles, I mean, Lencioni has so much good stuff on relationships and dynamics and work and all of that, how it relates together. But then I think too of, the spiritual formation pathway and slowing down, rule of life, all these rhythms as we just move through. And how do we do that in a time when our world has changed a lot in the last 10 years, the last 15 years, the last 4 years.
The last 4 years.
You know, like
Right.
it's been exponential, the ththings that have shifted,
Yeah.
and how are we doing in the midst of that, you know? And even, you know, I tell people to stop saying you're busy.
Yep.
We're all busy.
Yep.
I've never met someone who's like really not busy.
Right.
It's like our life is full. So like, how do we make sure, because we have a full life, that we're having these soul quenching opportunities and resources, like anything Ruth Haley Barton for the most part is like soul quenching and slows you down. And so just to sit down in those things, I think it's so good and so wise. So how do people, you know, connect, or who are people that should connect with things like Lead 222 and Walking Through the Valleys, the book? How do we get that? Kind of share with us a little bit, and we'll link to some of the stuff in the show notes as well.
Yeah, Lead 222, you know, the website is lead222.com, and we coach and mentor youth pastors and to lead healthy lives, families, ministries. We have a youth pastor conference. We have a marriage conference. And then something I started when I came on staff was lead staffing. And so I help churches hire youth pastors, and then, you know, we get to coach them and mentor them right from the beginning of when they start, to know that they're not alone. They have a community behind them. Which is so important. So that's, you know, about Lead, and so grateful for the work, you know, that Lead is doing, you know, here locally in the Indianapolis area and around the country. And Walking Through the Valleys is on Amazon, probably the best way to find it. And you know, if you can spell my name. I have a website, davechoutka.com, but it looks like Choutka.
Yes, it's so good. It's so good. So I would just encourage any of you, if you're if you are a youth pastor, to reach out immediately. If you're a pastor at a church, or you're really involved in your church, and let's say, hey, do we have some sort of coaching support network for our youth pastors that they can be a part of, or in need of a youth pastor for the lead staffing part. But then I would just encourage, you know, we shared a little bit about this, and I'm not going to go too far into it today, but, you know, this was a theme of our last year, of walking through really, really hard stuff with a very sick child, and just the ongoing nature of that. You know, the acute storm might be over, but you're still like, how do I get back up that side now, right? And so, you know, if you or someone you know, or someone in your family are just going through it, I would just really recommend this book. There's also some great sermons Dave has out floating on YouTube that point back to this book that kind of complement it well. I was listening to one yesterday. And cool. So I would just encourage you, you know, maybe you need to buy 5 of these so you have them on. Seriously, I do this with certain books. Like, you got 5 or 6 of them that you just have on hand. So when something comes up, or someone's really struggling, that you have something to say, hey, you know what, I think this is something that you can journey with and walk through, and know you're not alone, and know there's a redemptive thread of hope. And I think that's such a beautiful part of your story in this, Dave, is that place of surrender as you moved through the valleys, and seeing the redemptive thread of you on the other side. And I know that you're sowing seeds and life-giving things into people that I know. And so thank you for that. We need that in this world. We need that here in the Indianapolis area and in our country. And so, man, it's so good just to reconnect, to hear more details of the stories, and just connect people to the resources that you've got moving and grooving. Yeah,
Dave, thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to everyone for tuning in to this episode of the For Everyday Leaders podcast. We would love for you to follow the show, leave us a comment, leave us a review, let us know how the show is impacting you. You can check out the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, guys.